Greetings, fellow fans of Star Trek, and welcome to Captain's Yacht. As we depart planet Earth for the 24th century, a few things to point out. Don't forget to tune in to the last part of each video, in which Scholar Beta and me, Captain Kanaka, will issue a special kind of Star Trek assignment for you all. All you gotta do is submit it through the comments, and who knows, you might get a special A+ commendation. With that said, let's board the Captain's Yacht and see what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. We love Trek. Why would we be reviewing a show, TNG, if we didn't love this, right? There's no way you can say we're not into this. We love Patrick Stewart. But yeah, with their obvious holes, their obvious issues with this series, let's talk about them critically. We don't have to be tribalists. We don't have to defend every inch of this. We can expose some of its weaker threads too. And the one I want to start with is, to me, it is so shocking that they put this in here. It broke it for me in episode 1, to be honest. And that is the introduction of synthetic life forms that are called synths, which kind of sounds like dirty slang, honestly, for a subhuman class of indentured servant. And they made them humanoid, and they were surprised by the fact that these people rebelled. Which obviously we find out later wasn't actually a revolution, but was something, programmed by Commodore O. But still, I was so shocked and blown away that they would introduce slavery into the Federation. That I just kind of did a really full stop and, Measure of a Man from TNG second season, gotta be in the top 10, 15 episodes for Trek fans. Maybe, I would assume so, somewhere around there, or at least we know about it, right? Didn't we kind of discuss the concept of slavery and put it to bed, that we're not going to do that we're not going to create a whole... We even did that, and do you remember that episode, I think it's called Quality of Life, with the little exocomps that Data chooses to save over Picard in one scene? I'm telling you, we have moved on from this issue, and to make this a core pillar of the series, slavery? Wow, that is bold, Alex Kurtzman. That is bold. What do you think, my friend?
There are a few things that, let me put it this way. I absolutely agree with you that there are so many shocking things, and the synth thing, and the fact that they're okay with basically slavery. No.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing Scholar Beta when we do part 3 of our review series, in which you tackle that, because that is a kind of thing that should be tackled. It just shouldn't be tackled by the Federation. And the episode that I'm writing right now deals with that in a very specific way, which tackles the topics they want to discuss, but in one self-contained episode. So, with that in mind, the world building, there's absolutely no world building here. And before I get too far into this, I do want to point out, lead-in comics and books do not count. Please. I know I'm not a video game person, but I do want to point out this. The concept of downloadable content.
Yeah.
Where you buy something to enhance the experience of a story or the experience of a video game, not fixing very critical flaws of the product itself. It's meant to enhance, not correct, which is something that, as we get into these big multifaceted universes, Hollywood seems to have forgotten. So what I'm about to say here, I want to say that it's not explained in the narrative we see on television, or in this case via streaming, and therefore this is a flaw. There are 2 questions I wanted answered. The first question was, what are the Next Generation crew members doing?
Making pizza.
Well, beyond that, what's Worf doing? Worf gets one mention, Ford gets another mention, and Riker makes pizza. That's no.
What about Crusher?
Yeah, exactly. What about Crusher? She doesn't even get a mention. Worf and LaForge get mentions at one part of the episode, at one part of the show, but they don't. Again, Once again, folks, it does not count that they made a movie. There's a book. There's a book out there called The Last Best Hope, or something to that effect. It does not count because it's not explained in the show proper. Just wanted to get that out there. Also, what's the state of the universe? Because if you pay very special attention to Star Trek 09, Spock says the supernova threatens to destroy the galaxy. And it destroyed Romulus. I had a take on that again. Once again, how does this happen? Now, in my rebooted version of the series, which I need to point out, I only did because 2020. This is happening in 2020, and most fun is canceled in 2020 because I needed to point out I terribly offended somebody by suggesting some things in a comment once, and they completely unloaded on me. Yes, on me, if you can believe that. So I want to point out the only reason I took the time to redesign the show partially is because I love it. I love Next Generation, and partially because current events have canceled everything else I enjoy. Can't travel, can't even go to the gym, can't do these things that I enjoy. So with that in mind, what is the state of the universe? And in my version of the show, and I'm curious to see what you all think of this, we talk about that. It's never addressed in the show proper. So that is my biggest gripe.
Okay, and I think I have a theory on why they don't answer these questions.
Lay it on me.
I think it's because Chabon is the showrunner. You know what I'm saying? I don't think... Okay, so here's what I'm saying. I think the guy is an excellent writer. But why did they make this dude the showrunner? You know, was that the only way that they could sign Patrick Stewart on? Is to promise a great literary mind, you know, as the showrunner and not some Trek hack that's going to force you into a uniform or something like that? I don't know, man. But here's what I would say. I would say make Chabon's job to invent and create new things. And maybe he did. Maybe he created Rafi and Rios and Girardi. I don't really know. I have no idea. But make his job to create the new characters that Picard will interact with, that Picard will have to, you know, incorporate into his crew. I think that would be awesome. Let a showrunner who knows about Trek get it up and running, and let some new blood come in and with the framework that's established, tell really interesting stories. And I'm sure Chabon could do that. But when you say, okay, it's now your job to construct the entire premise, state of the galaxy, state of the TNG crew, state of, you know, Starfleet, that's an overwhelming responsibility for someone who's never been a showrunner on Trek before, in my opinion. And I think it shows. They don't even answer those basic questions that you put in there. And to be perfectly honest, I bet in the scripts that they came up with, they didn't address War for Geordi either, but someone said, dude, you got to address them. So they threw in one line, because they definitely are one-lined. Oh, why don't you call Wardy and Jorf? Well, I don't want them to get in trouble. I don't want them to sacrifice themselves for me. But Rios is okay to sacrifice for you?
And Rafi? Your
Girardi?
Second number one, and Girardi, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
You know, that's why I think it's an issue of who's writing this, because that's a throwaway line that if you examine for 10 seconds, you realize, wait a second, you know, isn't that the whole point of Worf's character, that he would rather die in glorious battle defending, you know, his captain than to be retired on the sideline and told to not participate? He hates that. So I give that, I don't know. I think it's like, man, you got some talent. You got Patrick Stewart and you got Michael Chabon. Come on, let's use these people's talents. Let's use their gifts and their skills. That's what I'm thinking. And then, you know, I think this directly leads into the tonal issue. The tone is just wrong because we don't have someone who's intimately familiar with Trek running and maintaining the whole show. So I know you got some thoughts on the tone. Lay it on me. What you thinking?
Yeah, so the tone is anything but Star Trek. It's Star Trek in name only. New Trek borrows so many tropes and motifs from other shows that happen to be popular right now, when classic Trek generally innovated its own. That being said, I would be remiss as a historian to say there aren't certain episodes out there in which they generously, let's put it this way, were heavily influenced by another show that was popular at the time. The one that definitely comes to mind right now is Tapestry taking a page from Quantum Leap. I'm not saying that Star Trek has never borrowed from other shows, but never to this extent. Never to the extent of general tone and motif. Case in point, Game of Thrones, the HBO series.
Mm-hmm.
Excessively violent and gory just scenes, and also gratuitous sex thrown in there too. I need to point out that this trend did not start with Picard. Discovery set the tone there. But it's a very, very terrible precedent there. Case in point, there's a scene in Star Trek Discovery, which for the light version of the episode, I'm not going to splice in the footage because you don't need to see the footage. A reasonable human being should be able to go through their life without seeing Klingon Chi-Chis and a Borg getting his eyeball pulled out. You should not have to go through life and see that. You really shouldn't. And there's a major detriment to the story in the sense that it alienates your audience. I grew up on Star Trek, and because Star Trek was made available to me when I was 4 years old, at a point in time where I couldn't speak or make coherent thought, Star Trek empowered me at that level, at that age, and yeah, that's the deal there. You shouldn't be able to see Klingon Chi-Chis. That should just be an unspoken rule. There are places on the internet, if you're into that sort of thing, to go see that. It should not be CBS All Access.
I was just gonna say, I might have a soft spot for Lursa and B'Etor, you know, and that's like their favorite thing to show off. But
not like that.
Jokingly aside, yeah, exactly. Aside from that, I would say, what are we doing in this? Are we supposed to feel awe and excitement at discovering something new, or are we supposed to feel tension because Soji's, getting closer and closer to her doom by Narek? Are we supposed to be grossed out by 7 of 9 evaporating people with laser guns or Borgs getting their eyes pulled out? What are we supposed to feel? I don't know, man. It's all over the place. It is all over the place. I did look up while you were talking about gratuitous, and I would say instead of gratuitous sex, it's just gratuitous nudity in Game of Thrones. Like maybe the sex is reasonable, but the nudity, they definitely did that. So like, in case you weren't fully invested in the A plot, well, here's something to look forward to. They actually kind of get away from that later, but you're not wrong about that. You're definitely not wrong about that.
Well, I'm glad I'm not wrong about that. I wasn't part of that privileged class of Americans who could afford HBO until HBO Max came out. So I'm behind on my Game of Thrones stuff. But there's also a comparison to Logan. This actually was intentional. There's a setting in which the world our hero fought to defend has collapsed, and the retired hero must come out of retirement to protect a young woman with extraordinary powers. As I said, that's probably one of the things that Patrick Stewart put in as executive producer. In theory, I'm fine with that. You have words on this, Scholar Beta.
I don't know. I'm just not a Logan fan. I know this is going to come off as overly negative, but again, I have a very special place in my heart for Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. And I love him to death, but I just don't know if we need to borrow from this. And I just don't know if we need to borrow from this and talk about gratuitous violence. Man, Logan. Woo! Lots of it. I don't know, have you seen it?
Yes, it's one of my favorite movies of recent time. That being said, a lot of, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, as a film, it's one thing, I think it was well made, and like I said, I love Stewart, I love Jackman in that. Do I need to see little kids running around murdering people? Well, maybe I do. Now I have. So there it is.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's definitely a good point there. With that in mind, to a lesser degree, and I know you have some words on this, people are making comparisons between this show and Westworld because of their attempted examination of synthetic life and synthetic rights. I just threw it out there. If you look at my script, it says synth rights ? And I think you have some words on this, Scholar Beta, so make it so.
I am insulted by this comparison. Westworld is a real show that is really intelligent. And I'm not saying Picard isn't a real show. Obviously, it's a real show. It was filmed. It's out there to watch, but Picard is not some type of intellectual pursuit of synthetic rights. And if you think it is, there's that tribalist mentality, because you're not watching the show. You're not watching the same show as I am, or as we are. And, Westworld's entire core is the investigation of synthetic rights. That's the entire core of it. Every plot thread weaves back around to what makes us conscious, what makes us human. Can we pass our humanity on to technology? The answer in that story is an overwhelming yes. What do humans become worse creatures when we invent a type of synthetic life form? Yes. Without giving it proper rights or recognition. Yes. So I'm just saying, overwhelmingly, that show treats the idea of AI and android intelligence much better. Now, it's got its own storytelling issues. It's really complicated, and its storytelling chronology is all over the place, and you gotta really be patient in season 2, in my opinion. But I think it pays off. I think that show is a way better science fiction show and a way better action show as well. And it too has the nudity and the violence going on, but it also has the intellectual through line of examining what makes us human, the idea of consciousness, all of that is just, way better. And I'll just point out, last thing I'll just say on this is that, you brought up Game of Thrones. I will say, obviously, the internet's abuzz with how that, went down in flames. But in terms of first season, Game of Thrones and Westworld are much better than this show. They are way more constructed. The characters are more compelling, and the ideas, in my opinion, of those are pretty compelling. I'm going to throw this one out there too, and I might get some hate for this, but I'm even going to say The Mandalorian season 1 is even better, because in a weird way, even though it's not about it is some kind of the characterization, and Baby Yoda is kind of a trick and is pretty mean, in my opinion. At least The Mandalorian does this thing where it combos short-form storytelling, episodic storytelling, with a longer arc. And it proves you can do it. You can have this big arc that runs throughout your entire first season, but you can also do individualistic episodes that reveal character. And the fact that Picard couldn't figure that out at all, I think that makes The Mandalorian a little bit better. So I'm just saying there's 3 examples of sci-fi shows that have either a tighter construction or do this long form, short form combination storytelling better. And this isn't a review comparing and contrasting those shows. That's not what we're about here. But in terms of, like, if you're going to look to borrow things, it is interesting that they borrowed parts and pieces, and maybe some of the worst parts and pieces, but maybe the parts and pieces that get the views, Who can say? Game of Thrones has a ton of views, and maybe it is because of the excessive violence and nudity. I'm not sure. I just, I'm not sure who's pointing or who's making that decision to pull that in. I don't know.
That is a very good point. And that's the thing. Classic Trek used to innovate. Now new Trek follows. And that's my biggest concern.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. This is a utopia. We're not going to go the whole dark action route. We're going to keep this thing as an idealistic look at the future. Yeah, that was leading, not following. That was definitely leading.
Very well said there. So what is your opinion about the plot lines? You have a lot of words, Scholar Beta, regarding the plot lines, so hit it.
Okay, I know I've been talking a lot, but I'll try to consolidate this a little bit. Okay, so we got these 10 episodes, right? And my feeling, more than anything, is that even though the premise is really simple, the plot is very convoluted. Okay, so we have 2 enormous backstory plots that are not really resolved or understood fully. The first one is the Romulan evacuation plot. The details of that are very confusing. Did the supernova happen in a day, in a week, in a month, in 10 years? Was the evacuation... I don't even know. I mean, they had time to build new starships, so they must have known this was coming for a while. I know the new supernova is explained in a comic book. I read that online, but I don't know how a supernova can threaten the entire galaxy. If you look at the galaxy, there's a lot of stars. The supernovas are happening all the time, and I don't know. It's just very confusing to me how we could not evacuate or know about this. So that's one. And then the second one is the synth uprising plot. You know, it's just like those are thrown at us immediately, and it's very confusing about when and how these things happened. And I think we're just supposed to go with it, you know. And I can't. I have a hard time getting on board those two plots. You would have thought about that. What are you thinking?
Regarding the supernova, the only way you can have it make sense is if you include some sort of exotic matter as some sort of propellant or fuel for the supernova.
And that's what they do in the comics.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that because yeah, and if you included something like the Omega particle being involved, the Omega molecule that was supposed to wreck the universe in Star Trek Voyager, totally okay with that. That works. So that's my point on that. But they didn't examine that. So
okay, this is a little. I know it's slightly digressing, and we're going kind of long. But quickly, do you remember what Spock's plan was in Star Trek 09 to stop the supernova? Because I read this and I really thought about this. Can you articulate it?
He uses an experimental exotic matter called red matter, which creates a black hole to absorb the supernova ejecta.
Okay, follow-up question. How is creating a black hole in Romulan space helpful?
The idea is it's supposed to...
I love that you're straining on this one, and let's go.
So my take on this is, and this can be seen in the episode that I redesigned, and it's available in the description below. The idea at this point is to contain the supernova.
Yes.
It's like you would a wildfire. So what happens is you have people associated with the Vulcan Science Academy going around the perimeter and dropping these things to absorb the matter and absorb the energy, to basically quarantine the part of where the supernova is affected. The part of the galaxy, which happens to be most of, this is me and my version of the show, most of the Romulan Star Empire, which again hasn't been explained in the show, has been affected by this, because even though they weren't wiped out because of the Omega particle involvement, you have fracturing of subspace where you can't use warp drive in certain areas. You have massive radiation spikes that happen ahead of the supernova, which causes ecological collapses. And that is how you cause the Romulan Star Empire, which is a contemporary of the Federation, to fall into failed state status. That is how you would do it. And that's how you could involve old Spock Prime using red matter, which is a silly invention, but my version of the show tackles that in a very specific way, in which you can do those sorts of things. That's my deal. That's how I would
too.
handle
I'm going to try to take that on as well. I am. But I'm just saying, man, they give us a pretty tough premise. We don't know a lot about this supernova, and we don't know a lot about the synth uprising. And to get back to the show, right, they start with that immediately. So it's like, okay, this isn't exactly a mystery because they come right out and tell us this happened. And so, but it's a lot of information to process, and we don't really know what to do with it, you know? Okay, so I'm going to go through this next part quickly, but this is the story proper. These are the plot lines we have going on. I'm going to read this quickly, and I hope the effect is that you're confused, because that's the whole point, that there's way too much going on. So here we go. We have the beginning of the story proper, which includes the Dodge activation plot and running away from assassins while seeking out Picard. Remember, that goes pretty much nowhere because that character dies immediately. The Sojourn the Borg cube plot, including her relationship with Narek, who is trying to extract the synth homeworld information from her and then kill her plot. Again, that's pretty much a main plot, and that takes a long time to unfold. The Commodore O is really a Romulan, is using Narissa and the Yacht Vash to wipe out synthetic life to avert the Destroyer prophecy. And then there's the revelation that O is behind the Mars attack. So, whoa, okay, that's a lot right there. And then we've got Picard's relationship with Data and his search for Soji and his brain issues and his golem body. And then we have his crew. We've got Rafi, her addiction, her broken family, that because it goes nowhere, does nothing plot. We have Rios and his trauma from seeing his father figure Captain Murder, Suicide, a synth. That kind of goes nowhere too, you know? We have Girardi and her relationship, and then she murders her lover, Bruce Maddox, and then she is tracked somehow. I can't remember how she's tracked exactly. They must have put something inside of her or at some point, right? And then she's using the tracking device, and she doesn't really have anything to do after that. except like use a sci-fi device to make 1,000,000 copies of the ship. Then we have Elnor, his abandonment issues and his ninja skills, and that goes nowhere and does nothing. Then we have Seven, her desire for revenge, her attempting to control the Borg cube, her crashing the Borg cube, and her killing Narissa, or I guess Narissa's dead. I mean, she could be alive. You know, maybe she survived that fall somehow and they're going to bring her back. I have no idea. Then we have Riker Troy and their son who passed subplot, which is supposed to foreshadow, I think, Picard and what's going to happen to him. I don't know. Goes nowhere, does nothing. Right? And then we finally, and that's all that stuff, my friend, takes place. That's 8 episodes. All of that. And then we get Synth Homeworld, Soon's son, Sutra, the attempt to destroy the beacon itself, the flower defense system, the robots that come through the dimensional portal, and we have the Romulan Synth Federation battle over the Synth Homeworld, where ultimately nothing happens and everyone goes home. So there's just a ton going on, a lot that doesn't go anywhere, but could potentially be set up for future seasons. But right, like, that's kind of the crazy thing about the long form story. If you're going to take a story and you're going to weave these threads long term, man, it would be nice at the end to kind of see how they start to come back together. That is the real trick, right? That's the really hard thing to do. And I guess I don't want to say they have to do it all in one season, because those other shows that I mentioned, Game of Thrones, Westworld, The Mandalorian, they leave a lot of unresolved, but not as much as this. Not even close to as much as this. You know, and this introduces way more. Arguably, Westworld introduces a little more in season 1, but this introduces a ton of stuff. And I kind of feel like they're throwing whatever they can, and they just want to see what sticks, and they're going to keep going with that, and they're going to ignore the other stuff. That's kind of the feeling that I get when I look at all these plots.
That's especially the new characters there.
The Rafi, Rios, Girardi, Elnor. I don't think they know what to do with those characters. I don't.
They don't. They really don't. So with that in mind, we've discussed everything that's wrong with the show itself. As we conclude our study of what's wrong with Picard, I do want to point out that there are significant things outside the show itself that bear discussion.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we've talked about the plot, and we'll talk about the characters later, but let's talk about kind of that ethos around it. Yeah.
Definitely. So with that said, there's this... Okay, so the showrunners basically took a page from Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and start attacking the fans. Now, why are you going to steal from that show? I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off. Why are you going to steal from that movie? Wow. Exactly. So with that said, I want to make a few things very clear here. And Scholar Beta, you did a phenomenal job of articulating this up front. But the knee-jerk reaction from people, specifically Shabon, has been people who don't like the show are anti-social justice warriors or supporters of the current lame duck president.
Well, that wouldn't describe us.
No, certainly not, because I preface this by saying that I am an Hispanic, Latino, Native Hawaiian individual on the autistic spectrum who's a registered Democrat. Although I sympathize with the political perspective of the writers, I can emphatically maintain that their political messaging is the worst part of the show, and it borders on propaganda. Now, in my definition of propaganda, I state that the difference between art and propaganda is complexity, in theme mostly.
Sure, yeah.
That's the deal there. It's complexity in theme. With that said, fandom seems to forget that you can sympathize with the intents and virtues of the story, but can still criticize their execution. They're not mutually exclusive. And the thing about Star Trek is, specifically classic Star Trek, you never fully knew where they stood on political issues. They examined both sides of a political issue. Sometimes they went conservative, sometimes they went super liberal. Conservative episodes include The Hunted. I get, coming from a military family background, a very strong veterans' rights vibe from that episode, The Hunted. Yeah. The Drumhead has been taken by modern conservatives as a way to support freedom of speech. The Game, in a sillier aspect, you got the conservative video games are the cause of destruction in society. It almost destroys the Enterprise. any episode that deals with space foreign policy. Journey's End is an example of this,
Yep.
where they
Yep.
tend to go more conservative than liberal. And then on the flip side, you got liberal episodes like Forces of Nature for climate change. They tackle LGBTQ plus rights very briefly, I grant you, but they do talk about it in Next Gen. So they go on both sides, and that's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes it art. Yes, Scholar Beta.
I was just thinking that Drumhead episode. Yeah, you could get the freedom of speech thing out of that. You could also get the immigrant rights. Because Simon Tarsus is a quarter Romulan or something like that is what they go with, and yet he's accepted. We accept immigrants and outsiders and people who look different than us. I don't think the conservatives would like that message, but I think that's also in that show too. We're not going to judge this dude because of his DNA.
But that's the deal, and that plays into my point here. That's what makes it art. The complexity, the multi-layers there, the fact that you can get something that can be derived for a conservative talking point, freedom of speech and censorship, etc. And on the flip side, you can talk about immigrant rights and the fact that Starfleet almost violated its own beliefs by profiling a person who was 1/4 Romulan. That's what makes it art. That is what makes it art. That's what fuels conversations. Conversations like you and I talking over Google Meets every Sunday, which we release every Tuesday, about Star Trek. That's what makes it art. That's what, by definition, propaganda has to be simple. Propaganda has to very quickly and very efficiently get the message across. Using that definition, Picard is propaganda, classic Trek is art. That's all I have to say about that. What are your opinions on that?
Okay, so here's I completely agree with you about the handling of political issues and the examining them. Remember that I mentioned that issue, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, The High Ground, one of my favorite kind of episodes that kind of goes under the radar. They are looking at terrorism. They're talking about, on one hand, they're talking about how these people who abducted Crusher are terrorists. On the other hand, they're talking about how George Washington was a terrorist, from the British's point of view. So, I think that's pretty fascinating. That's some interesting stuff right there. I agree with you on the fact that this show has a long-running record of looking at political issues from multiple perspectives. And then think about it. If we had a more inclusive writing staff, think about how much more of a richer discussion we could have about political, racial, cultural issues. There's a lot out there that we could explore. There's a ton out there. And it would be great to not just look at it from a Western kind of ethnocentric point of view every single time. We don't need that. We don't need that. You're right. That becomes propaganda at that point. And, I'll just point out a couple more things, too. There's some really fascinating contemporary issues that are way cooler than Brexit. How about, computer privacy rights? How about, the effect of social media and fake news and echo chambers? Maybe you don't want to get into that in Trek. What about stolen elections or environmental crises? You know what I'm saying? I just thinking of, 2 or 3 off the top of my head. There's just some way cooler things to explore out there than Brexit. And I know Patrick Stewart wanted to make this about Brexit. And again, I'm thinking, why are we giving this guy an executive producer credit? Because that's the only way we could get him to make the show. And I understand. I get it.
In the spirit of Picard and pragmatism and compromise and diplomacy, you could do both. And this ties into future episodes that we're going to tagline too, because I love that. And I'm curious to see how we could weave these in when we do our thematic review, not next episode, but the episode after that in our Picard series. But very quickly, your assignment for this section. In the spirit of Star Trek Picard, borrowing from the plot of Logan, here's your assignment. Pitch a story in the comments below, involving a plot or tropes from another franchise that you would like to see get the Star Trek treatment. Here's my model. Basically, James Bond meets Star Trek. You could call it section MI-31. Picture the protagonists who are cool and suave of Bond, and antagonists who are over the top, but with the technology, messaging, and geopolitical intrigue of Star Trek. That's what I would do. You
Okay.
want to do something else? You want to do, a General Hospital theme thing, Grey's Anatomy meets Star Trek? I guess you could do that, but I'm curious to see what you, the audience, are saying, and leave your pitch in the comments below. Scholar Beta, do you have a pitch for this?
I'm gonna say Star Trek, but actually smart like Westworld. In the foreground, our protagonists are a combo of synthetic life forms and struggling to gain consciousness, and the TNG crew members struggling to find their way in life after their bridge positions have been replaced by these synthetic life forms. And in the background, we have two chess masters. I love that kind of chess master behind the scene, pulling the threads trope. Bruce Maddox on the one hand, and Data. Oh, we're going to reveal that Data is also still alive and is a chess master, pulling strings and manipulating the pawns until Picard is able to expose Maddox and resurrect Data. There you go. There's my idea right there.
I like that. That's really good.
That's something that is Westworld's all about. Are people dead? Are they synths? Who are they? What's going on? Who's pulling these strings? Who came up with this whole thing? Do they have a master plan? The answer is yes, because they thought about the show more than 10 minutes before they wrote it. Sorry, just kidding. That was a joke.
There you go. So with that said, folks, we're wrapping up our time here. Next time on Captain's Yacht, we're going to examine the characters and what we could do to revise or strengthen the characters in the show, including Picard. So we're looking forward to that. Stay tuned. Remember, folks, fill out your assignments and post them in the comments. And we're looking forward to giving A+ commendations, memes, whatever. And we'll go from there. But as we wrap up, as we dock back with the ship, so to speak, several thank yous are in order. So big thank you, mahalo nui loa, to Memory Alpha for name checking. Scholar Beta, you have thank yous?
Yeah, just again, Memory Alpha, you're invaluable in this quest. I had no idea how to spell Yacht, Vosh, or Narek, or any of those words, so thank you for being amazing in there. Trekcore, I'm going to shout you out, even though I didn't get to hang out at your website this week. I assume you got some cool stuff on Picard. Maybe I'll go check that out. But always love you. And of course, those listeners, especially those listeners who complete our assignments and contribute to our conversation. We love all those listeners, but those who go the extra mile, and throw some things in the comments that we can chat up about next time. You're really awesome. And hey, you don't even have to put your name on it. Remember back in the day where if you didn't put your name on the assignment, it didn't get
you wouldn't get assignments?
Don't worry about it. You just it's automatic on the YouTube. So thanks to those who are participating and staying engaged.
There you go. With that in mind, folks, big mahalo nui loa, live long and prosper, and see you next time. This is Captain Kanaka speaking. On behalf of my esteemed colleague at Scholar Beta, we hope you've enjoyed this deluxe version of Captain's Yacht, a Star Trek podcast. This is a podcast done by two inner-city high school teachers learning how to make a podcast so we can teach those skills to our students in the fields of social studies and English language arts. If you like what you see and like to see more, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as both me, Captain Kanaka, and my colleague Scholar Beta are new to the podcasting realm and the video production realm, please give us any feedback you deem appropriate. We could definitely use it. So, with that said, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and see you next time.